Hello, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. Always a special day on July 22nd because it's the Feast of the Magdalene Day. It's a day that's celebrating Mary Magdalene, places that I visited in France, where it's believed that she migrated after the crucifixion because of the persecution of the Romans. And there's so much rich history there. And anyway, they celebrate her every July 22nd. And we're equally blessed that on this July 22nd, we have what I believe to be one of the most thought-provoking, forward-thinking, conscious teachers of the feminine of our time, and that is Dr. Maureen Murdock. I had the opportunity to meet her at Pacifica Graduate Institute and just was able to learn from her directly. And this whole Jungian psychology, reclamation of the goddess, reuniting with the goddess through her work, The Heroine's Journey, Woman's Quest for Wholeness. Yeah, so she's a Jungian psychotherapist in private practice in California. She was chair and core faculty of the Masters of Arts Counseling Psychology program at Pacifica Graduate Institute. She teaches memoir classes, which is how I met her, throughout the US and Europe. And her book, The Heroine's Journey, is a favorite of mine. It's actually the 30th anniversary publication of the book this month. And she's also the author of Fathers, Daughters, Breaking the Ties That Bind, as well as some other beautiful works on memoir. She has written pieces for Huffington Post. So yeah, she's got a lot of great work in the world, and it's just a privilege that she was agreeable to coming here on Women Seeking Wholeness. So I want to just read to you a little bit about what the Heroine's Journey is. And you can actually just go Google it. It's based on Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces, his hero's journey, which she feminized, and we'll explain that in our episode. But it starts with separation from the feminine. So I'm just going to read all the steps of the heroine's journey. Separation from the feminine, identification with the masculine and gathering of allies, road of trials, which is meeting ogres and dragons, finding the illusory boon of success, awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity, death, initiation and descent to the goddess, which is the very bottom of this cycle of the hero's journey, urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine, healing the mother-daughter split, healing the wounded masculine, and then finally integration of masculine and feminine. So as we've talked about a lot on these episodes I've put together, there is a masculine and feminine energy within each of us that we are seeking to fuse or connect or integrate, not just within each of us, but within our culture, within our larger culture, within our earth. And so she takes a dive into kind of mapping that feminine healing process within women. And it's absolutely fascinating. So we will dive into that, and we have a really great discussion, especially about why this is relevant for COVID and how the planet itself is on that same heroine's journey that we are, to find that integration collectively. Also, I'm super excited. I purposely chose July 22nd as the launch of my new Feminine Boss School. It's a program I put together, 12-week crash course on goddess confidence, finding your soulpreneur path, and balancing biz with motherhood. Very close to my heart. I just finished shooting last week, so you just go to femininebossschool.com and read all about it, but it's so fun. And it's just kind of a culminating work for me on how to help you rise to your calling. And it's very relevant to the heroine's journey, actually, is to just speak up, step out, and be who you are, in whatever messy way that looks like. So you can go to femininebossschool.com. Check it out. It's a program. It's under $100. And I'm just beyond thrilled for its launch, especially on this July 22nd, Day of the Magdalene. So anyway, let's bring on the great Dr. Maureen Murdock. Maureen, I'm so grateful that you've decided to grace us with your wisdom on such a special day. You and I were talking about this previously, the Magdalene Day, the Feast of the Magdalene, Mary Magdalene. So it's a special day for me personally, July 22nd. And I'm just thrilled that we're going to be diving into all things feminine with you, because you are, to me, the godmother of this. Well, for our listeners,
thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the privilege of speaking to your compatriots,
my partners in crime.
Yes,
those of us who are very dedicated to awakening. That's how I would describe my listeners.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
So share with us, Maureen, just give us a little glimpse into your history, your her story of how this path found you. Why such a fascination with the feminine?
Okay, with the feminine in general. Um, hmm, that's an interesting question. I I grew up Irish Catholic. I went to Mass every day as a young person, I would say from age 5 to 17. I always knelt in front of the statue of Mary. So I had a real devotion to the Blessed Mother. And my path uh, to the feminine, well, it really comes out of a deep sense of feminine spirituality or connection to the Great Mother. And during the 70s and 80s, I did a lot of art on the whole topic of changing woman, contemporary faces of the goddess. And at the same time, I was studying Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Mm.
And he had come out to what is now Pacifica. At that time, it was called the Human Relations
Which is
Institute.
where I met you.
Uh-huh.
I met you at Pacifica. Yeah.
In Santa Barbara, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, he used to come out in the late 70s and early 80s from New York and lead us through the stages of the hero's journey. And so when he published The Power of Myth, I started to use the monomyth of the hero's journey with groups of men and women. So this was the early 80s. And we would go through the stages of the hero's journey over a 9-month period, once a month. And what became very clear to me, and particularly the women in the group, was that the stages of the hero's journey, which in some ways are similar to the heroine's journey, but the focus was not on what we needed, which was healing the wounding of the feminine, both on a personal and on a cultural level.
Yeah.
And, during that time, the women's movement was very active in terms of researching goddesses and researching feminine spirituality. So the books that were being written during the late 70s, all through the 80s and early 90s, were primarily about feminine spirituality. So that's how I came to the focus on the feminine. And if you've read the book, you know that I went back to New York. I think it was in 81 or 82 to meet with Joseph Campbell and to show him the model of the heroine's journey that I was working on. And what he said to me at the time was, Maureen, women don't need to make the journey because they're the place that everyone is trying to get to. And I think what he meant by that was the feminine or the spiritual was the place that everyone was trying to get to. But at that time,
that perturbed you a little bit.
Yeah,
in your work.
Me.
Yeah,
It perplexed me. I was and am a psychotherapist, and the women in my practice definitely were looking for a model of their own journey, not wanting to copy the masculine journey.
sure.
So what I thought to myself was, okay, well, that may be true mythologically, but it's not true psychologically. And so the women, particularly of my generation, which was the generation of the second wave of feminism, we were looking for something. We were all pretty burned out doing the masculine hero's journey. And what was clear was that what was missing was a need for deep healing of our inner journey. So that's a long way of telling you.
No, I think that's great. And I very much resonate with Jungian psychology, depth psychology. Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, is amazing. But for you to sort of meet him and sort of confront that, I mean, maybe in your mind, hoping that, hey, maybe he would see the depth to what I'm really asking for, right?
Well, I knew him because he would come out to Santa Barbara when he worked with us at what is now Pacifica. I had been his assistant, in the sense that when he would do his lectures, he would always ask me to take the group through a meditation before we started. So we already had a relationship, and I had been working on a heroine's journey for children, because at that time I was teaching both elementary and junior high. And I wanted to take the stages of the hero's journey and adapt them for children. So I had also been showing him the model that I had developed for kids. So, it wasn't really unusual for me to write to him and say, I'm coming to New York. I'd like to talk to you about this. And it's really interesting. I think I just mentioned to you that we have moved recently. And when I was, going through my files, I found the letter he wrote me after our visit, in which he said, you still have me thinking about this. I look forward to what you come up with. So
he was waiting for you to do the work, it sounds like.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about how we have this inevitable descent into the underworld to meet the dark feminine. And I think that's misrepresented. And you mentioned that very, very early in your book. And I would love, because he talks about the underworld, right? But he doesn't necessarily equate that with feminine. So it might seem like I'm jumping around a bit, but I would love to explore. Is it related? Oh, okay. So the next thing you say, out of this darkness comes an urgent need to heal what I call the mother-daughter split, the deep feminine wound. And so as we're trying to, I guess, actualize or come back to the reuniting with the goddess, which is kind of your that you hold sort of in the mid-heroine's journey, that we have to, it's the bottom, right? That the descent too, there's a descent process to the goddess, which I found completely fascinating. Don't you think that's what's happening on the earth?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think we need to go back to the split, the mother-daughter
split. Yes.
Well, first of all, I wrote this from the perspective of a father's daughter, which on an individual level, a woman who's a father's daughter idealizes and identifies with the masculine, which was true for a lot of women of my generation whose mothers were not out in the world and who we may have seen as lacking power and passive, and particularly if a girl had a difficult relationship with her mother, oftentimes there was the rejection or separation from the mother or from the feminine what a daughter might think as she looks at her mother is she may understand her as a figure she simultaneously resists and depends upon. But a figure, particularly, I would say, of my generation, where we used our mothers as the base from which we became something more. So that rejection, that early rejection of the mother or of the feminine causes a split in a acceptance of our own bodies, our own sexuality, our creativity, and this longing instead to identify with the power of the patriarchy.
Mm.
So the journey to the descent is really, in a sense, to reclaim the power and the creativity and the connection to the earth and connection to the body and sexuality of the feminine, that part that we split off from. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the descent to the
Yes.
quote dark feminine.
Mm-hmm.
It's, what did we discard? What did we disown? And if you think of myths like the Inanna Ereshkigal myth of the Sumerians, which is, our first written language on clay tablets, that story is the story of the feminine making the descent to embrace and to have empathy with the dark feminine, or the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, and then to bring back to the upper world only those aspects of her being that she wants to expand or wants to integrate into her being, instead of focusing on the power of the patriarchy.
Right.
So,
And it is, also just the descent into oneself. It's not necessarily physical descent, although it could be, but
yeah,
it's just
oftentimes a psychological descent. I mean, when a person makes a descent, they oftentimes, one of the things I talked about was voluntary isolation, that they go through a period where they are maybe reclaiming or remembering the wounds of the past and working on those, healing those.
yes.
So I would say, yes, it is a psychological and a spiritual journey.
I just want to read something beautiful that you wrote that talks about this descent, because I talk a lot about the dark night of the soul on this podcast. And it reminds me a lot of that, voluntary isolation and regrouping and questioning everything. But I just wanted to read this part of your introduction that I found so beautiful. You said, as we were talking about reclaiming the goddess, that you had posted, shared an entry from your journal. You said, "This is uncharted territory. It's dark, moist, bloody, and lonely. I see no allies, no comfort, no signs out. I feel scraped, open, and raw. I look for the dismembered parts of myself, something recognizable, but there are only fragments, and I don't know how to put them together. This is unlike any struggle I've had before. It's not the conquest of the other. It's coming face to face with myself. I walk naked looking for the mother, with a capital M, looking to reclaim the parts of myself that have not seen the light of day. They must be here in the darkness. They wait for me to find them because they no longer trust. I have disowned them before. They are my treasures, but I have to dig for them. This journey is not about some fairy godmother showing me the way out. I dig for patience, for the courage to endure the dark, for the perseverance not to rise to the light prematurely, cutting short my meeting with the mother."
Mm-hmm.
That just gives me chills. That's just, I mean, I've not as poetic as you, but I've put similar longings into my own journal. I don't know how old you were when you wrote this, but I'm 51 right now. And I feel like I'm coming out of a 7-year cycle of the dark night.
Yeah, yeah. I was the book took me 8 years uh,
Mm.
to write. And let's see, it came out, I think, when I was 45. So, is that right? Yeah, that is right. So I was writing it all through my late 30s and early 40s.
Mm.
And where I really went through a very dark night of the soul was around 48,
Hey,
moving.
that's when mine started.
Yeah. Well, I think, in terms of our um, physicality, I mean, that's for me, that was perimenopause. It was also my children leaving home for college. And so there was that sense of, you know, who am I without my mothering role? And
Yes.
who am I without my fertile sexuality?
Yes.
So, yeah, it was a deep, deep descent, and a descent just, uh, so many different things throw a person into a descent, whether it's earlier in life than you or I had it, when kids leave home and separate from parents, or the death of a parent, child, lover, or even pet, a particular illness, a geographical move, giving birth. A lot of women go into a descent after giving birth,
Mm.
going through a midlife transition, as you and I just talked about, and loss of community. I mean, so many women who got, focused on careers, lost their woman's community, lost, hanging out with other women. And so I hear that a lot for women who miss their woman friends.
Yeah.
But the kind of all of the feelings and words that were swallowed early on in life, those raw, primal, uncivilized, not nice feelings like rage, hate, and fear come up during the descent. And that's why so many women choose voluntary isolation, because their families don't want to hear about it.
Hell hath no fury.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And there were actually some people close to me who said, "Why are you so angry?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you're supposed to be becoming more spiritual or enlightened, you sure seem really pissed off. Like, who
Yeah.
are you?" you know?
Yeah.
And I took that in, and I'm also like, it's this kind of like righteous indignation. It's not personal to any one person, but it's definitely anger towards systems. I
Yes.
think that's what really hit me the most was the anger towards the patriarchy. Um, but it was also anger at myself for not having advocated for things that I felt dissonance with, that I didn't
Uh,
necessarily speak out against or rise up to meet or truly question.
well, that's why this the descent and then the urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine is so important for women to find their voice and to give themselves permission and give each other permission to speak our truth, whether other people want to hear it or not. I mean, I think right now is so exciting with Black Lives Matter that they're getting so much support from people all over the world who want to hear their voice. Um,
Mhm.
so, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I
We
think the
Oh, go ahead.
descent, is very much a call, um, and requires a woman to respond consciously to, in a sense, accept the invitation to create herself anew.
Yes. It's such a grand cosmic invitation right now for the
Yeah,
feminine to rise up in each individual, not just women. I would say especially women, but certainly there's feminine in men. I want to read what you wrote about the feminine, the term feminine,
okay.
and then we can kind of talk a little bit about how that's relevant to what's happening right now with planetary situations.
Yeah,
You said many women are afraid of the term feminine. It has become a tainted word. Some feel that inherent in the definition is the obligation to take care of others. society has encouraged women to live through others rather than find their own fulfillment. Catherine, a woman in her late 40s, says, "The images of the feminine that were presented to us in my childhood were either of the sex object Marilyn Monroe or of the great selfless provider." I'm assuming she means Mother Teresa. I don't know. Either way, you ended up as the big tit. I'm
Yeah.
afraid that if I'm seen as feminine, I'll lose my independence and be taken advantage of. So that whole thing about the good mother you talk about, we
Uh-huh.
grapple with this. What's the right way to be a woman? Is there a right way to be a woman? Um,
That has, each woman has to come to terms with that herself. But I've been looking at the difference between masculine and feminine leadership. And if I came down to two words, it would be feminine leadership, and the feminine in general is about collaboration.
mm,
And masculine leadership, or the masculine in general, is very much a win or lose competitive point of view. So I think
it's more of a top-down approach as opposed to an egalitarian approach.
yeah, and an interdependent approach. I think the feminine, well, and again, here I'm talking about leadership, values life over material success. When I was researching the different women who have been the leaders of countries dealing with the pandemic, I want to find the quote for you. Chancellor Merkel said, "We are a community in which every life and every person counts." I mean, that to me is, in a sense, a definition of the feminine. She is a person who, of course, honors science because she's a scientist, and honors the expertise of other points of view. Whereas the masculine, coming back to the competition, there is this sense of I know it all, and refusing to collaborate with scientists or health experts.
How do you see that playing out in religion?
In religion? Oh,
Where do we even start with that, right?
yeah. Are you sure we want to go there?
No. Well, I go there a lot actually because I attract a lot of listeners through this podcast as well as into my personal space who are really feeling some disillusionment with religion because of exactly what we're talking about. They see people being marginalized. They see the lack of collaboration with women. They very much see the hierarchy and traditional approach to this is the way things are done. And so they're grappling with that. I include myself in that. That's one of the things that put me into the dark night of the soul, actually.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned to you, I grew up Irish Catholic, going to Mass every day. That's, from 5 to 17. And the whole time I was kneeling in front of Mary, I was like, well, one day I'll be up on the altar as the priest or priestess. Well, that's that's a long time ago that I've been waiting. That's not going to happen in my lifetime. And the Catholic hierarchy is just holding on for dear life, devaluing women, devaluing the feminine, and at the same time, the feminine are their handmaidens to the Lord. So, yeah.
But at least Catholics have Mary, statues of the feminine, like Mary. In most traditional Christian religions, and even in Mormonism, how I was raised, where she's veiled. There isn't that, tangible connection or developed theology on who mother is, only that she populates planets and has children. There's nothing beyond her motherhood that we can attach to.
Right, that's true. Even though, here she had the strength and the stamina to accompany her son through all of his suffering. So, and not every mother could probably do that during that political time.
Right.
So, yes, and I noticed when I went to study in Zurich, I went to um, the church that was in was it Kusnacht, and it was really the first time I had been in a Protestant church, and there was I don't know why I expected to see Mary, but there was absolutely no image of the feminine, and I thought, wow, most people have grown up only with that image of a patriarchal God. And that was something that I think I was lucky that I rejected very, very early on,
Mm-hmm.
was the image of a patriarchal God. But you're right, it was because I had Mary. And I also looked to Mary as for spiritual nurturance from a very, very early age, because I had a difficult relationship with my own personal mother. So Mary became, in a sense, my mother. And then I would say in my 30s and 40s, nature and the sea became my mother. I started leading vision quests for women and, going out into the wilderness for 3 to 7 days and feeling that deep, deep connection to the earth and animal life and the cycles of the moon. So
Beautiful.
for me, going back to your question about what's the feminine has a lot to do with nature and listening to the rhythms of our own bodies.
I love a lot of what you wrote about that. How we're going to have this reclamation, both as a species and as individuals, is to come back to spirituality through body awareness, through movement. And as women, we're taught to, and I mean, and this is what I see perpetuated in a lot of religions: it's the body is evil, it's your vehicle for temptation. It's and then we have the whole body shaming culture. But you said because women have been viewed as manipulative or wimpy if they acknowledge the limitations of their physical body, they have learned to override pain to keep up with the men. The
Mm-hmm.
female body has been both an object of desire and of scorn. And then you
Right,
talked about all the rejection that can ensue. It started with Eve as
right,
seductress. Um, just all the taboos around sexuality that's been perpetuated for thousands of years, not seeing our sexual. And I've done a few podcast episodes on just the reclaiming women's sexuality as a pure, powerful force for
right,
creativity.
right.
And it's, I don't know why there's just within religious institutions and politics, that seems to be still a super taboo thing to explore for whatever reason.
It's all about power.
Mhm.
The masculine is afraid of women's power.
What do you think it is that they're afraid of? From I know that you're a Jungian psychologist, so what do you think? What's the fear? What
oh,
would they fear?
the fear of being taken over. Um, the
Maybe
we've
becoming
been
irrelevant, or
maybe becoming invisible. It's just such hubristic point of view. Um, the mother has been denigrated for centuries, and I mean, if you think about what's happening in our culture right now, with the even the Supreme Court having to come down with decisions about a woman's right to choose. I mean, it's just extraordinary to me that we are still fighting for our own reproduction rights. We're also fighting for healthcare with the Trump administration's desire to get rid of Obamacare. about 30% of women in this country are going to lose health care. So they won't be able to get birth control. So the masculine has tried to control and suppress the feminine for, as you know, over 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it has to do with the fear of losing power, the fear of losing property, the fear of losing birthright, in the sense of, the feminine can give birth without me. I mean, there's all of this very strange thinking that is not even conscious, but the masculine wants to keep the feminine in its place.
Yeah, and the healthy masculine, I think it's important because you do bring, as part of the heroine's journey, is integrating. Your final step, which I find absolutely fascinating, is that there's an integration of the masculine and the feminine, because we have to heal that wounded masculine prior to the integration. Just like we have this whole separation from the feminine, that's how we started. And we're going through all of these, these series of life experiences and splitting and disassociating and trying to heal the wounded feminine, heal the wounded masculine. And I can literally identify where I am on this right now. I'm at the urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine and heal the mother-daughter split. That's where I am. But healing the wounded masculine, maybe just explore
a little bit of that.
A little bit more about that.
Before we move to that, I just want to mention, when we were talking about nature before, if you think about it, during this coronavirus, one of the most wonderful things that has come out of that is that you can hear birds now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas particularly in cities, you couldn't hear birds. And people are out in nature. They're walking in nature. They're becoming aware of the trees. They're becoming aware of weather. People are slowing down and feeling their connection to the earth. So if we want to say something positive that's come out of this pandemic, that has been one of the very, very positive things. The other thing is that people have become aware of the inequity in our country, anyway, certainly of the world, as people of color are the ones who are dying more than white people. So we're having to wake up.
I see also, all these injustices, all of the old traditions, all the old ways of thinking. Also, another thing that I found really powerful about COVID, well, two other things in addition to what you mentioned. Number one, a lot of people are transitioning or feeling displaced, whether it's traditional forms of employment or relationships that aren't serving or whatever. They're just transitioning and feeling displaced a little bit. And also I see people having to go within more. They're kind of having to go into the feminine, like you said, or in nature, or and sit with themselves and examine their beliefs.
And with their creativity. More people are painting and drawing and dancing and singing. They are reclaiming those early aspects of ourselves that are so free when we're young children.
Yeah. Awesome.
So in terms of healing the unrelated or wounded masculine, I think the first thing all of us have to do is to identify those unrelated or wounded aspects of the masculine within ourselves, and taking back the projection of those qualities on the men in our lives. And so, what are the unrelated aspects of one's masculine nature? When I was writing it, I was very aware of having an internalized driver that really never let me rest. And that came directly out of, my father was an advertising executive in New York, and he was a man who was driven. He was very creative, but I don't remember him ever being home for dinner because he worked long hours. And so that was an aspect of the wounded masculine that I certainly took on myself. And so, that part was very repressive of my body and feelings. The unrelated masculine denies your limits, tells you to tough it out, no gain without pain, kind of the macho part within ourselves. The aggressive part, the competitive, I'll show you part, and power hungry. And research has suggested that power has a really corrosive effect on the psyche. So, the first part is really looking at how we've internalized that ourselves, and then learning to cultivate positive aspects of our masculine nature. And the way I was defining that was some aspects of learning how to follow through and back yourself up, looking at all possibilities, developing a healthy bridge between your images or your dreams and manifesting them, believing in yourself, growing an internal supportive father. So whether you grew up with a father or whether you grew up with a supportive father, starting to figure out how to support yourself in a healthy masculine way. Really focusing on actualizing your creative potential. And I think for women, stop saying, I'm sorry. We all make mistakes. And it's important for us to express our feelings clearly, to develop empathy, and to stand our ground. You were talking before about finding your voice. I mean, finding our voice and standing our ground and seeing the value in what we have to say. So that's what I was talking about in terms of healing the unrelated or wounded masculinity. And I see men now really looking at toxic masculinity and wanting to make a change within themselves and within the culture. And that's very exciting.
It is very exciting. And I have recently stumbled upon many, many awakened, integrated males. And it's so beautiful to see that. And I have 3 sons myself. So it's a chore. But I think they're getting more, I would say, a little bit healthier programming. It depends on where they hang out on social media, but it seems like there's a greater awakening happening, and a greater knowing that they need to do away with these old ways of, go, 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 crush it, kill it, goal-oriented, win, lose, black, white, absolutism, dogma, etc.
And learning how to listen. I mean, I think women, because we are better listeners, I'm going to make that generalization, is teaching our sons and our partners and our colleagues to listen.
Yeah. I love kind of what you shared in this. And I would just encourage everyone this is your 30th anniversary of this book's publication, which is amazing.
Yeah. It came out in about 14 languages after it was first published, and then including Farsi, which really excited me.
Let's wake up that. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and Korean. And Shambhala is bringing out both the Heroine's Journey and the Heroine's Journey workbook next month, August 18th. And I'm really excited that they're bringing both of them out, because I hear from women all of the time saying, where's your workbook? And the workbook came out in 98, and then I think went out of print in early 2000. But I wrote the workbook so that women could go through the stages of the heroine's journey with particular exercises that they could do in a group or do the exercises individually. And
Mm.
I think particularly doing them in a group and sharing, what comes up during each stage is really helpful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'll have to get my hands on the workbook. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I
Yeah.
want to just touch also on, um, you talked a little bit kind of towards the end about Celtic Christianity, which
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a lot of roots with that, with my genealogy, ancestry.
Uh-huh.
But what I found fascinating is the triple spiral that is reflected in a lot of the art in Celtic art about the
Yeah.
triple goddess.
Right. The
Um,
maiden mother crone.
mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, and maybe people, you know, maybe people wouldn't completely resonate with this, but I certainly do because I've been to that part of the world and I've, seen some of these things. But it says, um, Jesus actually knew he had the capability to go between worlds, between the corporeal and spiritual worlds, the two
Right.
worlds.
Right.
And so he was part of this consciousness where he was accepted by these druids, these Celtic, ancient Celtics. And so that's why a lot of people say that the Celtic cross, it's representative of the ability to walk between the two worlds. I actually have a Celtic cross in my office here that I look at
Uh-huh.
frequently. It
Uh-huh.
was fun to read that. It also just, I think, the denial of the sensuality of life, of the feminine being just this enjoyment and groundedness and intuitive exploration of the inner life, the what lies beneath the surface, the wisdom of the body and that kind of thing. How could that ever be evil? And I think Jesus was trying to teach that.
Right.
Somehow it just got a little warped.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky enough to go to Iona, which, when you were talking about how thin the veils are, I mean, you can really feel deep, deep spirit and deep.
Where's this? Where's Iona? I've heard that before.
It's in Scotland.
Ah, I got to go there. It's on my
Yeah,
bucket list.
yeah, yeah. In fact, in one of the old church ruins is Sheelanigig, the Celtic goddess. I have an image of it in the Heroine's Journey where she's holding the vulva open. And
Mm.
for me, that's such a wonderful image of the birth and death cycle of the Great Mother. When you were asking before, why is the masculine so afraid of the feminine? It's because in the matristic cultures, the focus on the goddess was about birth, death, and then renewal. And I think too many people got stuck on death without really thinking about the full cycle of life and death.
Yes, the
Yeah,
creation, the eternal nature, the spherical nature of creation and regeneration and rebirth and renewal. Yeah, I love it.
right. And Newgrange in Ireland, which is just this extraordinary ancient Celtic site, you actually crawl into the cave or the tumulus at Newgrange. And when you're inside there, you actually do feel like you're in the womb of the Great Mother, which I also have felt in sweat lodges. So the Native Americans are very, very connected to the physical and sensual aspect of feminine spirituality.
Yeah. And I think, and I got to go there too. I'm like writing notes. Okay, I'm going to Iona. I'm going to Newgrange, Ireland. I've
Yeah,
heard of some of these places, but I haven't made it there yet. I think, religion separating from the feminine, religion separating really from nature,
right.
you know,
Yeah,
not making nature our classroom and our teacher and teaching people to breathe and center and align versus outsourcing their own knowing and sovereignty.
right, right, right. What's I think so interesting is And I think it's also part of this pandemic is that so many people now are doing yoga. And that
Yeah.
is very focused on the body. And you were just talking about breathing, very focused on breath. I volunteer at a local federal prison, Lompoc Federal Prison, and we have yoga teachers going into many of the prisons now to work with the men, really to help them deal with their anger through breath and through stretching and through focusing and through meditation. So, when we were talking before about healing the wounded masculine, I see that as one of the ways that is really maybe cutting through the need to be aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Through that through the exploration and nature and creativity. Yes,
And the
that's
body.
and
And
the
the
body.
body really
Full
honoring.
embodiment,
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
I think that is the heroine's journey as I see it. As
Full
the
body.
reclamation, the full reclamation of your soul through your body, through the body,
Uh-huh.
instead of trying to separate them, and it's the fusion of them.
Yeah, well, the journey of the feminine has always been down and in, whereas the journey of the masculine has been up and out. And in a sense, that's the difference between, what you were saying before about our religions have been focused on up and out, God the Father up in the sky somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been trying to bring that connection to spirituality down into the body and down into the earth.
Yes, and Zen Buddhists teach about the worlds of plants and minerals and animals, and we all know there's a veil. We know, that there's an unseen force. There are unseen beings like angels and guides, and there's just so much mystery. And I love that you kind of tie it up with mystery,
Uh-huh.
mystery, and being able to, you know, I think it would be amazing to walk between the worlds as Jesus did. And I think he was trying to tell his followers that, and especially as apostles, greater things than I've done, you can do, that you've seen me do, you can do.
Uh-huh.
But until we get to that point, and that's always a quest of mine, is to like, how do I stay fully in my body and also feel this connection to the more esoteric or, beyond the veil, and bridging that heaven and earth, which is a lot of why I'm drawn to Mary Magdalene, is because
Yeah,
she
yeah,
really,
sure. Yeah. You know what? I'd like to read you something if you wouldn't mind.
please.
Um, because we're talking about different spiritualities. And I have found in the Navajo creation story the union of the masculine and feminine in a way that's very clear and, very clear.
Mm,
Um, so in the Navajo creation story, changing woman speaks to her consort, the sun. She says, "Remember, as different as we are, you and I, we are of one spirit. As dissimilar as we are, you and I, we are of equal worth. As unlike as you and I are, there must always be solidarity between the two of us. Unlike each other as you and I are, there can be no harmony in the universe as long as there is no harmony between us.
mm,
If there is to be such harmony, my requests must matter to you. My needs are as important to me as yours are to you. My whims count as much as yours do. My fidelity to you is measured by your loyalty to me. My response to your needs is to reflect the way you respond to mine. There is to be nothing more coming from me to you than there is from you to me. There is to be nothing less."
wow, that's
Yeah,
powerful and beautiful.
yeah, it's just so poetic. This
Mm,
is the Navajo creation story where Jungian woman speaks to her consort, the sun. And it's in a book, Dine Bahane, Dinebahane.
Beautiful. Well, I could just talk to you for hours and hours. And I'm just so grateful that you brought the heroine's journey into the world, because even before I signed up for the memoir writing course at Pacifica, of which you were a part, I knew about your work. I knew about the heroine's journey. I had taught it. I actually show a PowerPoint slide of the whole thing in a lot of my retreats. And I'm just grateful I got to meet you in person. I'm sure you don't remember my face, but I was probably the one taking a billion notes while you were writing.
Oh yeah, I remember you.
And it's just wonderful that you are still as you advance in years, we need more women like you. I hope I'm like you when I'm older, where I can just still teach and share and never stop with that dissemination of what it means to be whole. And that's the title, that's the byline of your book is Women's Quest for Wholeness. And hello, this is called Women Seeking Wholeness, this podcast. Right. I promise I didn't steal it from your subtitle.
I did notice that. Yeah. And I'm sure you will. I'm sure you're a woman with deep wisdom, and you will continue teaching and writing and telling your story. So thank you very much for inviting me and having this conversation. And I guess I won't see you in person anytime soon.
Not anytime soon, but I will definitely be a fan from afar.
Thank you. Thank you.
The separation from the feminine, from our natures, from nature itself, has caused the most damage to our ascension and our expansion and evolution as souls. That is shifting. So please find Maureen's book, The Heroine's Journey. It's put out through Shambhala Books, and you can find it on Amazon, The Heroine's Journey, Woman's Quest for Wholeness. Eerily similar to Women Seeking Wholeness, which I actually never put together until I was interviewing her, even though I read this book many years ago. I want to leave you with a poem by Rhett Kelly that Maureen speaks of in her book. Somewhere up the road, in another voice and another language, she waits for another time and the washing of the feet, while I, salt-tear woman size, stand solidified, Lot's wife, looking back at my flaming city, valleys and mountains and plains away, stand turning, millennial weight of years, turning to the distant waiting woman, noting uncountable epic lives with no names, falling and tumbling down rock-encrusted hills, woman without end, her rhymings going with her, her rememberings, her hard words, her soft words, cries, my cries, all are unheard. The ways I am hearing the silent sounds of women, beginning to break open and be heard deep and wide, full turning, one step forward, one more and yet another. I move up the road to her who I am and am not yet. Have a glorious week, and remember to check out FeminineBossSchool.com for my 12-week crash course. Launched today, July 22nd, 2020, a special day for me, and the crash course on Goddess Confidence, finding your soulpreneur path and balancing it all with motherhood. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week on Women Seeking Wholeness.